In the forgotten corners of the Appalachian wilderness, desperation has a way of finding sanctuary. Sarah Lawson, 8 months pregnant and pursued by relentless debt collectors, fled into the mountains with nothing but a backpack and fading hope. The first snow had already dusted the peaks when she discovered the cabin, weathered logs and a sagging porch that promised shelter from the coming winter. Inside, peculiar items suggested someone had lived there not long ago. A hand-carved chess set with one missing piece, preserved food stores, and a journal filled with cryptic entries about the forest. As Sarah settled in, the cabin's secrets began to reveal themselves. Strange markings on the walls, hidden compartments beneath floorboards, and eerie sounds at night. Who had lived here before, and why did they disappear without a trace? Sarah stumbled through the thinning tray line, one hand braced against her lower back, the other clutching her worn backpack strap. 3 days of walking had left her feet blistered and her muscles screaming. The baby kicked, a reminder of why she couldn't stop. Not yet. When the cabin appeared between the pines, Sarah first thought it was a hallucination. She stood soneless, breath clouding in the cold air, afraid it might vanish if she blinked. A simple structure of weathered logs with a stone chimney, snow dusting its sloped roof. No vehicle, no tracks, no smoke. Hello? Her voice sounded strange after days of silence. Nothing answered, but the whisper of wind through branches. The porch steps creaked beneath her weight. At the door, Sarah hesitated, knuckles poised to knock. Foolish habit. She tried the handle instead. Locked. Desperation pushed her around the cabin's perimeter, where she found a window with a broken latch. Small mercies. Inside, the cabin smelled of pine, dust, and something else. A lingering scent of tobacco and spice. Not abandoned long there. Sarah lowered herself onto a wooden chair, wincing as her swollen ankles throbbed. The interior was surprisingly well kept. A stone fireplace with stacked wood nearby, shelves lined with jars, a narrow bed against the far wall. Her gaze settled on a hand-carved chess set atop a small table. Pieces positioned mid-game, the black king conspicuously absent. Sarah picked up a white knight, admiring its detailed craftsmanship, the horse's mane flowing, eyes seeming almost alive. Someone had spent hours creating this. "I won't stay long," she whispered to the empty room, just until she rested her palm against her belly, unable to finish the thought. Until what? Until the baby came, until spring, until whoever owned this place returned. The cabin offered no answers, just silence and shelter. Sarah inventoried her own supplies: 3 protein bars, a half-empty water bottle, a Swiss Army knife, $43 in crumpled bills, and the clothes on her back. Enough to survive maybe 2 more days. She'd run without planning. That had been the point. When the final notice came, when the men in suits had threatened to take everything, planning had given way to pure animal instinct. Run, hide, survive. Now exhaustion washed over her in waves. Outside, the afternoon light was already fading. Sarah forced herself to check the cabin's cupboards before surrendering to rest. The discovery nearly brought her to her knees. Canned goods, dried beans, rice, flour, even some jerky, enough to last weeks, maybe months, if rationed carefully. In the small bathroom, a rusted mirror reflected a woman she barely recognized. Dark circles beneath her eyes, cheekbones too prominent, hair limp and unwashed. Only her eyes held the same determination they always had. Sarah splashed cold water on her face and filled her bottle from the tap. The pipes groaned, but delivered clear, cold water. Another miracle. As darkness fell, Sarah built a small fire using the stacked wood. Each log she added felt like theft, but the alternative, freezing in the mountain night, left no choice. The flames cast dancing shadows across the walls. In their flickering light, she noticed markings near the ceiling, symbols and numbers that made no sense to her exhausted mind. The narrow bed beckoned. Sarah pulled back the quilt, checking for unwelcome inhabitants before sinking onto the thin mattress. Her body practically wept with relief. The baby shifted, settling into this rare moment of peace. "We'll figure this out," she promised, stroking her rounded belly. "We'll be okay." As sleep claimed her, Sarah's gaze drifted to the chess set, to the space where the Black King should stand, to the game interrupted. In her last conscious moments, a thought surfaced. Whoever had lived here had left in a hurry, abandoning even this beautiful, handmade treasure. Had they left by choice? Or had they, like her, been running from something? Outside, wind moaned through the trees, carrying the first real snowflakes of winter. The mountain was sealing itself off, day by day, trapping her here, or perhaps, she thought as consciousness slipped away, protecting her. Sarah woke with a start, heart hammering against her ribs. Darkness pressed in from all sides, disorienting her. Not her apartment, not her bed. The cabin. Right. Something had woken her. A noise from outside. She lay perfectly still, straining to hear above the whisper of her own breathing. There it came again, a cracking sound, like a branch snapping under weight. "Just the wind," she murmured, but her body remained tense, alert. The fireplace held only embers now, casting a dim red glow that barely reached the bed. Cold had crept in while she slept, and Sarah pulled the quilt tighter around her shoulders. The baby stirred, pressing what felt like an elbow or knee against her ribs. Another sound, a scraping against the cabin wall. Sarah sat up, pulse quickening. Wild animals, she told herself. Bears, maybe, or raccoons. But the hollow feeling in her stomach suggested something else. Something worse. Debt collectors wouldn't track her this far, would they? The collection agency had seemed ordinary enough at first. Formal letters, then phone calls. But the men who came to her door that final day had seemed different. More determined. More threatening. "We always collect," the taller one had said, eyes flat as he surveyed her small apartment, gaze lingering on her pregnant belly. One way or another. Sarah swung her feet to the floor, wincing at the cold boards beneath her soles. She needed light, needed to see. Her hands fumbled for the flashlight in her backpack, and its weak beam cut through the darkness. The cabin looked different at night. Shadows gathered in corners, turning familiar shapes strange. She directed the light toward the window, seeing only her own reflection. Behind that, darkness and the vague outlines of trees. Nothing moving, nothing watching. "Get it together," she whispered to herself. The flashlight beam swept across the small desk in the corner, catching on a leather-bound book she hadn't noticed earlier. Curiosity overrode fear, drawing her toward it. A journal. Sarah settled into the desk chair, placing the flashlight to illuminate the pages. The handwriting was neat but cramped, covering margins completely as if paper were precious. Dates marked each entry, the most recent from just 2 months prior. September 14, snow, earlier than predicted. 3rd year in a row, pattern accelerating. The anomalies in sectors 7 and 8 have stabilized, but readings from the ridge suggest new activity to the north. Still no contact from base. Radio silence now at 47 days. Supplies adequate for winter if necessary. Sarah frowned, turning pages. Some entries were normal enough. Weather observations, notes on wildlife. Others contained strange symbols, diagrams with measurements, coordinates. Interspersed were more troubling entries. October 2 tracks again last night. Not animal. Not entirely. Larger than before. Closer to the cabin. Set up additional monitors at perimeter. October 9. Something tripped the east sensor at 3:17 a.m. Nothing on camera. Battery failure or equipment malfunction. Must be alternative unacceptable. The final entry, dated October 15th, sent a chill through her. Lights on the ridge again, moving this time. Information. They know I'm here. If anyone finds this, the sentence ended there, mid-thought, as if interrupted. Sarah closed the journal, suddenly conscious of how exposed she felt near the window. She returned to the bed, bringing both journal and flashlight with her. Sleep seemed impossible now, with questions multiplying in her mind. Who had written these entries? A researcher? Survivalist? Someone mentally unwell? More concerning, where were they now? The night stretched endlessly. Sarah dozed fitfully, waking at every creak and groan of the cabin settling. Memories intruded each time she closed her eyes, the mounting bills after Martin left, her supervisor's pitying look when she requested maternity leave, the final eviction notice taped to her door. Running had seemed her only option then. Now, with the cryptic journal entries swirling in her mind and strange sounds outside, she wondered if she'd fled into something worse. Dawn finally arrived, pale light seeping through frost-edged windows. Sarah rose stiffly, her back aching. The journal sat beside her, its mysteries temporarily overshadowed by more immediate concerns. Food, warmth, security, whatever, whoever had been here before, whatever they had feared or studied or fled from, their absence had created a space where she could exist. For now, that would have to be enough. Today we make this work, she told her unborn child, resting her palm on the taut skin of her belly, one day at a time. Outside, the forest stood silent under a new layer of snow. All night sounds erased like they had never been. Morning light revealed the cabin more clearly than Sarah's exhausted exploration had allowed yesterday. With resolve strengthening her tired body, she began a methodical inventory of her new shelter. The main room served as kitchen, dining room, and living area. A stone fireplace dominated one wall, its mantel holding a few carved wooden figures, birds in flight. A sofa faced the fire, worn but clean, with a small coffee table before it. The kitchen area consisted of an old propane stove, a sink with a hand pump, and cabinets that Sarah now approached with purpose. "Let's see what we're working with," she murmured, opening the first cabinet door. The sight inside stopped her cold. Shelves lined with mason jars, each meticulously labeled in the same cramped handwriting from the journal. Wild blackberry, August 2024. Venison, October 2024. Applesauce, September 2024. Dozens of jars, each preserving food that still looked edible. Sarah's hand trembled as she pulled out a jar of peaches. The label read, "Late harvest, September 2024, with a small notation, sweeter than July batch. Good vitamin C source." The pantry revealed more treasures, bags of rice, dried beans, flour, sugar, salt, and even coffee. A row of canned goods sat neatly arranged. Vegetables, soups, fruits. Nothing fancy, but to Sarah's eyes, it was a king's bounty. "This is," she trailed off, overwhelmed by the discovery. "Enough food to last months, if managed carefully." The previous occupant had clearly planned for isolation, but why leave it all behind? Sarah moved to the small desk where she'd found the journal. The drawers yielded pencils, a compass, matches, a small first aid kit, and a detailed map of the surrounding mountains. Names she didn't recognize marked various peaks and valleys: Bear Trap Ridge, Stillwater Creek, Fortune's Gap. A wooden chest at the foot of the bed contained extra blankets and clothing, all men's, all practical. Wool socks, flannel shirts, heavy pants, too big for her, but adaptable. The bathroom held basic toiletries, plus a stash of medicines, aspirin, antibiotic ointment, bandages, and concerningly, several prescription bottles. All bore the same name: Thomas Kerr. "Thomas," Sarah said aloud, the first concrete detail of the previous occupant. She examined the bottles, but recognized none of the medications. The utility closet revealed tools: hammer, saw, axe, nails, wire. A fishing rod stood in one corner alongside a tackle box. Most surprising was the rifle mounted on wall hooks, a box of ammunition on the shelf below. Sarah left it untouched. She'd never fired a gun and didn't intend to start now. After completing her indoor inventory, Sarah forced herself to step outside. The cold bit through her jacket, but the sun shone brilliantly against fresh snow. From this vantage point, she could see how isolated the cabin truly was. Forest stretched in all directions, broken only by the rise of mountain ridges to the north. A woodpile stood stacked against the cabin's side, covered with a tarp, enough to last through winter if used judiciously. A small shed nearby contained gardening tools and empty containers, suggesting a garden plot beneath the snow. An outhouse stood 20 paces from the main structure, a grim reminder of the cabin's limited plumbing. Sarah circled the property carefully, noting the location of what appeared to be a well, a clearing that might serve for drying laundry, and worryingly, several metal contraptions that looked like animal traps. Back inside, the warmth enveloped her gratefully. Sarah stood in the center of the cabin, taking mental stock of her situation. She had shelter, she had food, she had basic tools and supplies. She had privacy, and if the journal's paranoia was just that, safety. What she didn't have was any idea how long she could stay before the cabin's rightful owner returned, or what Thomas Kerr had been doing here, or what had made him leave in such apparent haste. Sarah's gaze fell on a particularly large jar on the lowest pantry shelf, half hidden behind the others. Unlike the food containers, this one held papers, documents, folded and sealed inside glass, as if for protection. Too tempting to ignore, she carefully removed it and twisted the lid. Inside were property deeds, insurance documents, and what appeared to be research grant paperwork, all bearing the name Thomas Kerr, all suggesting that this isolated cabin and its careful provisions had been someone's life work. Sarah slipped the papers back into the jar, suddenly feeling like an intruder rather than a refugee. But the baby kicked, reminding her why such concerns would have to wait. Survival first, ethics later. Sarah woke on her third day in the cabin with a sense of purpose. If this place would shelter her, shelter them through winter, she needed to make it truly habitable. The baby kicked, as if in agreement. First she tackled the dust. Using a broom found in the utility closet, Sarah swept every corner, disturbing cobwebs and revealing floor planks of rich, honey-colored pine. She wiped surfaces with vinegar water, something her grandmother had sworn by. The physical work warmed her, easing the constant chill that had settled in her bones since fleeing the city. Next came organization. Sarah rearranged the furniture slightly, positioning the bed to catch morning light while keeping it away from drafty windows. She sorted through Thomas's belongings, setting aside items she could use, a flannel shirt that might serve as a nightgown, wool socks that would stretch over her swollen feet, a sturdy belt she could modify to fit under her growing belly. In the wooden chest, beneath layers of clothing, Sarah discovered a handmade quilt. Unlike the utilitarian blankets on the bed, this was clearly craftsmanship, perhaps even art. Intricate geometric patterns in blues, greens, and earthy browns formed what looked like a map or landscape. Sarah spread it across the bed, admiring the precise stitching. Something about the pattern tickled her memory. Frowning, she retrieved the journal she'd found on her first night. There, in the margins of several entries, were sketches that matched elements of the quilt's design. Triangular formations, circular patterns, lines intersecting at precise angles. "What were you mapping, Thomas?" she whispered, tracing the quilt's pattern with her fingertip. With the cabin growing more orderly, Sarah turned her attention to practicalities. The propane tank that fed the stove seemed nearly full, a blessing she hadn't dared hope for. The hand pump at the sink drew clear, cold water from what must be a deep well. She tested the small wood stove and found it drew perfectly, warming the cabin quickly with minimal fuel. In the kitchen, Sarah organized the food stores, creating a rational system. Items that would expire soonest at the front, preserved goods that would last the winter at the back. She allowed herself a jar of applesauce, savoring each spoonful while carefully washing and saving the jar afterward. As afternoon faded toward evening, Sarah noticed a loose floorboard near the desk. Curious, she knelt awkwardly, her pregnant belly making the movement clumsy. The board lifted easily, revealing a small space beneath. Inside lay a flat box containing what looked like photographs and a small cloth bag. Sarah hesitated, feeling the invasion of privacy more acutely now that she'd spent days among Thomas's things. But the mystery of his sudden departure pulled at her. She opened the box. The photographs showed a younger man, presumably Thomas, standing beside various scientific equipment. In some, he wore what looked like university clothing, in others cold weather gear in remote settings. A few showed him with colleagues, all smiling professionally at the camera. Only one revealed a more personal connection. Thomas with his arm around a woman, both laughing against a backdrop of autumn leaves. The woman's face had been carefully cut from the image. The cloth bag contained a simple gold wedding band. Sarah returned everything to its hiding place, feeling a complex sympathy for the absent Thomas. Whatever had happened with his research, with the woman in the photo, had left him isolated in these mountains, meticulously documenting strange observations. As night fell, bringing another snowstorm that rattled the windows, Sarah built up the fire and wrapped herself in Thomas's quilt. The first substantial snowfall since her arrival transformed the landscape outside into an unbroken white blanket, beautiful and isolating. The mountain was sealing itself off for winter, just as the journal had predicted. Sarah placed a protective hand over her belly. "We're safe here," she told her unborn child. For now at least. But as wind howled around the cabin's corners, she couldn't help wondering if Thomas had believed the same thing before, whatever had forced him to leave. The quilt's pattern seemed to pulse slightly in the firelight, its geometric shapes forming a message she couldn't quite read. Outside, snow continued to fall, erasing any trace of how she had come to this place or how she might leave when the time came. Each silent, drifting flake added another layer of separation between Sarah and the world she had left behind. For better or worse, the cabin was home now. 1 week into her stay, Sarah discovered the cellar. She had been investigating a draft coming from beneath the cabin's rear corner, assuming it was just poor insulation. Instead, her fingers found a metal ring hidden beneath a small rug. With effort, she pulled, revealing a trapdoor set into the floorboards. Darkness yawned below. Sarah hesitated, her hand instinctively moving to protect her belly. After retrieving the flashlight from her backpack, she eased herself onto the narrow wooden steps leading down, testing each one carefully before committing her weight. The cellar was larger than she expected, extending beyond the cabin's footprint. The temperature dropped noticeably cold, but not freezing, perfect for storage. Her flashlight beam cut through shadows, revealing shelves lining the walls, stacked with more supplies, additional preserved foods, jugs of water, tools, batteries, medical supplies. "Thomas, you were ready for the end of the world," Sarah murmured, moving carefully through the space. In the furthest corner stood a desk, with what appeared to be radio equipment, dials, switches, a microphone and headphones. All powered down, covered with a fine layer of dust. Sarah brushed her fingers across the control panel, wondering if it still worked, if it could reach the outside world. She deliberately left her cell phone behind when she fled, knowing it could be traced. Now she felt the absence of connection like a physical ache. Next to the radio sat more notebooks, research journals, similar to the one she'd found upstairs, but covering earlier dates. Sarah opened the most recent, scanning entries from last spring. April 17, base now denying anomalous readings, despite my documented evidence. Suggested equipment malfunction or observer bias. Have worked in field 22 years. No difference between malfunction and unexplained phenomena. April 29, funding cut officially today. Given 2 options, transfer to Alaska project or resignation. Chose third option, will continue observation independently. Have enough personal savings for 8 to 10 months, if careful. May 3, noticed surveillance at lower cabin, moved equipment to this location. Trust no one from project now. Sarah frowned, flipping through more pages, filled with technical language and abbreviations she didn't understand. Clearly, Thomas had been conducting some kind of scientific research, had disagreed with his superiors, and had gone rogue. But what exactly had he been studying? The answer, or at least a hint of it, covered the cellar's far wall. Her flashlight revealed a large map drawn directly onto the concrete, more detailed than any hiking map, showing topographical features, coordinates, and dozens of locations marked with X's and dates. The markings formed a pattern, clustering around specific areas. Some X's were circled in red, others in blue. Arrows indicated movement or direction between points. The map didn't match any conventional representation of the mountains Sarah was familiar with. Something about the proportions seemed wrong. The distances distorted, yet the precision of the drawing indicated Thomas had created it with careful measurement and observation. Below the map, a heading written in bold letters, Anomaly Tracking, Phase 3, and a subtitle that sent a chill down Sarah's spine, Temporal Displacement Field Boundaries. Sarah traced the markings with her finger, stopping at a spot labeled Primary Cabin, with yesterday's date written beside it, the ink still fresh. Someone had updated this map recently, very recently. Her heart pounding, Sarah swept the flashlight around the cellar again, suddenly feeling watched. But she was alone, the cellar still and silent, except for the occasional settling of the cabin above. She noticed a locked cabinet in the corner, painted with the same warning symbol she'd seen in the journal, a triangle with a wavy line through its center. Despite her curiosity, something about that symbol kept her from attempting to open it. Before ascending the stairs, Sarah examined the support beams overhead, looking for signs of structural weakness. Instead, she found more symbols carved into the wood, similar to those in the journal, and on the quilt pattern. Some resembled letters from alphabets she didn't recognize, others looked more like mathematical notions or circuit diagrams. Back in the cabin's main room, Sarah lowered the trapdoor, her mind spinning with questions. Thomas hadn't just been hiding from former employers. He'd been documenting something unusual enough to cost him his career and drive him into isolation. And based on the fresh ink on the map, either he had returned recently without her knowledge, or someone else was continuing his work. Either possibility left her feeling vulnerable, exposed, despite the cabin's solid walls and remote location. Sarah pushed the small rug back over the trapdoor, concealing it again. Tonight, she decided, she would sleep with the rifle nearby. Despite her aversion to firearms, outside the afternoon sun cast long shadows through the trees. Sarah checked the locks on the doors and windows, for the first time feeling less like a fortunate trespasser and more like a potential target. The storm arrived without warning. One moment Sarah was gathering kindling near the trail line. The next, the sky darkened as if someone had drawn a heavy curtain across the sun. Wind whipped through the pines, bending their tops like dancers. The temperature plummeted. Sarah abandoned her half-filled basket, clutching her coat tighter as she hurried back to the cabin. Fat snowflakes began to fall, quickly obscuring the path. By the time she reached the porch, her hair and shoulders were covered in white. Inside, she stoked the fire with trembling hands. Through the window, she watched the landscape transform. Snow fell in sheets now, driven sideways by gusting wind. Within an hour, drifts had formed against the cabin's north side, reaching halfway up the windows. This wasn't an ordinary snowfall. This was winter asserting its dominance. Sarah thought of the journal entries describing early, severe weather patterns. Thomas had been right, another prediction confirmed. She wondered what else he had been right about. As afternoon surrendered to evening, the storm's ferocity only increased. Wind howled down the chimney, causing smoke to occasionally billow into the room. The cabin's logs creaked and groaned under the assault. Drafts found every crack and seam, sending icy fingers across the floor. Sarah built up the fire as high as she dared, then wrapped herself in the quilt, its geometric pattern somehow comforting now. Her world had contracted to this single room illuminated by firelight, while outside nature reclaimed the mountain. On the shelf near the door, she noticed an old weather radio she'd overlooked during her inventory. Sarah retrieved it, turning the dials hopefully. Static filled the room, the sounds strangely comforting after days of silence. She adjusted the frequency slowly, searching for a signal, expected to continue through Thursday with accumulations of 15 to 20 inches at higher elevations. Travel is strongly discouraged, and mountain roads have been closed by authority of the Forest Service until further notice. Repeat. Winter storm warning remains in effect. The voice cut to static, then faded entirely. Sarah tried other frequencies but found only white noise or occasional unintelligible fragments. Still, the brief connection to the outside world gave her a strange sense of relief. Civilization existed beyond these mountains. People were out there, even if she couldn't reach them. The baby had been quiet all day, concerning after weeks of active kicks and movements. Sarah pressed her hand against her belly, waiting. Nothing. She changed positions, took a few deep breaths. Still nothing. "Come on, little one," she whispered, a new fear gripping her. "Give me a sign." As if in response, a particularly violent gust rattled the windows. Something heavy struck the roof. A branch, perhaps. Sarah jumped at the sound, and in that moment felt it. A decisive kick, then another. Tears of relief sprang to her eyes. "There you are." The storm continued through the night. Sarah slept fitfully, waking at each new sound. The crack of snow-laden branches, the moan of wind, the hiss of snow against glass. During one such waking, she noticed a faint pulsing light outside. Sarah crept to the window, wiping condensation from the glass. Through swirling snow, she glimpsed what looked like distant flashlights moving among the trees. 3 distinct sources of light, moving with purpose along the ridge opposite the cabin. Then, as quickly as they had appeared, the lights vanished, swallowed by the storm. Morning revealed a transformed world. Snow covered everything, smoothing the landscape into gentle curves. The storm had passed, leaving behind a stillness so complete it seemed supernatural. Sunlight reflected blindingly off the white expanse. Sarah opened the door cautiously. The cold hit her like a physical blow, stealing her breath. Snow had drifted against the cabin, creating a wall she had to push through to step outside. Her boots sank, knee-deep with each step. The world had become unfamiliar overnight. Landmarks she'd grown accustomed to, the woodpile, the path to the outhouse, the garden shed, were now indistinguishable mounds beneath the snow. Only the tallest trees remained recognizable, their dark trunks rising from the white. Sarah struggled to the ridge where she'd seen the lights. The journey, normally 10 minutes, took nearly an hour through the deep snow. Her muscles screamed with effort, and her lungs burned in the frigid air. At the ridge, she found nothing, no footprints, no disturbance in the snow's perfect surface. Whatever she'd seen, the storm had erased all evidence of its passing. Back at the cabin, exhausted and chilled to the bone, Sarah faced reality. The mountain pass would be impassable now. Even if she wanted to leave, she couldn't. Not until spring thaw. Months away. By then her baby would have been born here, in this isolated cabin, with its strange artifacts and absent owner. She was committed now, bound to this place by winter's implacable authority. 2 weeks after the storm, Sarah began to feel less like an intruder and more like a caretaker of the cabin and its mysteries. Her body had adapted to the rhythm of mountain life, waking with the sun, conserving energy through the coldest hours, sleeping deeply in the profound silence of snowbound nights. Today, she decided to learn more about Thomas Kerr. The task felt less invasive now. If she was to give birth in this man's home, she deserved to understand who he was and what might have driven him away. Sarah began with the desk drawers she'd only cursorily examined before. The bottom drawer stuck slightly. Sarah tugged harder, and it gave way suddenly, revealing a stack of envelopes bound with twine. She untied the bundle carefully. Each envelope was addressed simply to Thomas, no surname, no return address. Each bore a postmark from Riverdale, a town Sarah vaguely recalled from maps of the region, and each remained unopened. Sarah weighed the bundle in her hands, conflicted. Reading someone's mail crossed a line she wasn't sure she should breach. But her instinct said, these letters might explain Thomas's sudden departure, might warn of dangers she should know about. The earliest postmark was from February, the most recent from October, just days before Thomas must have left. Sarah arranged them chronologically, noting the increasing frequency, 1 in February, 2 in March, weekly by September. She selected the final letter, dated October 20. If any contained urgent information, it would be this one. Sarah carefully opened the envelope, unfolding a single page covered in flowing handwriting. Thomas, this will be my last attempt to reach you. I've respected your need for solitude, but events have accelerated beyond our prediction. Carter has assembled a new team to continue the project under military oversight. They're using your research without acknowledgement or ethical constraints. More concerning, 3 temporal anomalies have been detected near your location in the past week. You know what this means. They're expanding the field deliberately, despite your warnings about instability. If you won't come back to help us contain this situation, at least relocate to a safer location. The cabin falls within projected displacement boundaries for December. I still believe we can fix this together, but time is literally running out. I'll be at the usual meeting point this Sunday at noon. Please be there. If not for me, then for the work. Always, E. Sarah. Reread the letter, trying to make sense of its cryptic contents. Temporal anomalies, displacement boundaries. It sounded like science fiction, yet the writer's concern felt genuine, and something about the cabin being within projected displacement boundaries sent a chill through her. Was the cabin somehow unsafe? She opened several more letters, working backward through time. Each contained similar warnings, growing more urgent with each month. Each mentioned the project and anomalies without explaining either. Each was signed simply E. Between the letters, Sarah found a small photograph. A woman with dark hair and serious eyes stood beside scientific equipment, similar to what she'd seen in the cellar. On the back, in Thomas's now familiar handwriting, Ilona, first field test, March 2023. Ilona, E. The desk yielded little else of interest, so Sarah moved to the bookshelf. Among field guides and technical manuals, she found personal volumes, dog-eared poetry collections, philosophy texts with margin notes, novels by McCarthy and Murakami. Thomas Kerr was not just a scientist, but a thinker, perhaps even a romantic. His clothing told another story. The worn flannel shirts and sturdy work pants spoke of practicality, but a carefully folded dress shirt and tie suggested someone who moved between worlds, wilderness and civilization, isolation and connection. In the bathroom cabinet, prescription bottles confirmed what Sarah had begun to suspect. Thomas suffered from anxiety, perhaps even PTSD. The medication dosages had increased over time. The final piece of the puzzle emerged from beneath the sink, where Sarah found a box containing newspaper clippings, each detailed environmental disasters, strange weather phenomena, or unexplained events. One headline from last year stood out: Research Station Accident Claims 3 Lives Investigation. Ongoing. The article described an explosion at a remote government facility. Among the victims, Dr. Elena Martinez, 38, environmental physicist. Sarah sat back on her heels, piecing together the fragments of Thomas Kerr's life. A brilliant scientist conducting controversial research. A relationship with a colleague who had died tragically. Increasingly urgent warnings from someone signing as E. Perhaps a colleague of the deceased Elena, or something more inexplicable. Then, Thomas's sudden departure, leaving behind his carefully constructed sanctuary and research, leaving no trace of where he'd gone or why. Sarah returned to the cabin's main room, cradling her belly thoughtfully. "Your temporary home has quite the history," she told her unborn child. "I just hope we're not still in danger from whatever sent Thomas running." Outside, snow continued to fall intermittently, reinforcing their isolation. Sarah glanced at the calendar she'd begun keeping. December 15th. According to Elena's letter, the cabin now fell within those mysterious displacement boundaries. Whatever that meant, the calendar on the wall now showed late December. Sarah had been in the cabin for nearly a month, and her body had changed dramatically. Her belly stretched the fabric of Thomas's old flannel shirt, which she'd taken to wearing over her own increasingly tight clothes. The baby moved constantly now, a reassuring presence in her isolated existence. Today's goal was rabbit. Sarah had been eyeing the snares hanging in the utility closet for days, her preserved food supplies ample, but fresh meat an increasingly appealing prospect. Thomas's handwritten survival guide, discovered tucked beneath a stack of field journals, provided detailed instructions. "Identify game trails," Sarah read aloud, running her finger under the neat handwriting. "Set snares at natural bottlenecks, fallen logs, rock formations, dense brush." In the margins, Thomas had added observations specific to this mountain. "Winter rabbits follow eastern slopes. More sun, better forage. Set lines before dawn." Sarah dressed in layers, her own leggings under Thomas's canvas pants, cinched with rope below her belly, 3 pairs of socks inside boots she'd stuffed with newspaper for better fit. The morning air bit her lungs as she stepped outside, frost crunching beneath her feet. Dawn was just breaking, painting the snow-covered landscape in shades of pink and gold. Egging Thomas's notes, she headed east, the snares and a small knife in her pack. The exertion warmed her quickly, though her awkward gait in the deep snow made progress slow. She stopped frequently to catch her breath, her pregnant body demanding more oxygen than before. The eastern slope revealed exactly what Thomas had described, subtle depressions in the snow indicating rabbit paths between sheltering evergreens. Sarah selected 3 promising locations and carefully set the snares according to the guide's diagrams. The work was fiddly, her fingers clumsy in gloves, but eventually each trap sat ready. "Now we wait," she told the silent forest, and hoped Thomas knew what he was talking about. Back at the cabin, Sarah distracted herself with other survival skills. The guide covered everything from fire building to wild edible identification, emergency first aid to weather prediction. Thomas had supplemented the printed text extensively, adding local knowledge gained through careful observation. Pine needle tea, high vitamin C, harvest new growth only, boil 5 minutes. Add honey from pantry stores. Sarah followed these instructions, creating a surprisingly pleasant beverage that warmed her from within. The simple accomplishment boosted her confidence. She was learning, adapting, surviving. By afternoon, curiosity about the snares drew her back to the eastern slope. The first 2 traps were untouched, but the third held success. A snowshoe hare, its white winter coat nearly invisible against the snow. Death had come quickly, the snare doing its work efficiently. Sarah felt a complex mixture of emotions, satisfaction at providing for herself, sorrow for the creature's death, gratitude for the sustenance it would provide. "Thank you," she whispered, following another of Thomas's margin notes. "Always acknowledge the gift of life taken to sustain your own." Aboriginal wisdom worth remembering. The guide's instructions for dressing game were methodical and unemotional. Sarah followed them carefully, her initial squeamishness giving way to focused concentration. The process was messy, but educational. By the time she returned to the cabin, her pack contained neatly butchered meat and the pelt, which Thomas's notes suggested could be cured using supplies in the cellar. That evening, Sarah cooked her first fresh meal in weeks, rabbit stew with dried vegetables from the pantry. The rich aroma filled the cabin, triggering memories of family dinners from her childhood. She found herself talking aloud as she stirred the pot, explaining the process to her unborn child. "The key is slow cooking," she said, letting the flavors develop gradually. The one-sided conversation felt less strange than it had weeks ago. In the profound isolation of the mountain winter, creating connection, even with a baby who couldn't yet respond, felt essential to maintaining her sanity. As twilight descended, Sarah took her bowl to the porch despite the cold. The forest spread before her, vast and indifferent to her small triumphs. Stars emerged overhead, brilliant in the clear mountain air. A distant howl echoed from the ridgeline. Wolves, perhaps, or coyote. Sarah wasn't frightened by the sound anymore. Instead, she felt a strange kinship with these other survivors, all of them navigating the harsh winter landscape according to their own instincts and knowledge. Back inside, warmed by food and accomplishment, Sarah added a note to Thomas's guide. First successful snare, December 23, Eastern Slope effective, as predicted. The small addition made her presence in the cabin feel more legitimate somehow, as if she were continuing Thomas's work rather than merely benefiting from it. That night, she slept deeply, one hand resting protectively on her belly, the other curled around the small knife she'd used to dress the rabbit, both nurturing and pragmatic, like the mountain woman she was becoming. The new year arrived without fanfare. Sarah marked it with a small X on her calendar, reflecting on the strange path that had led her to this moment, alone in a mountain cabin, 7 months pregnant, surrounded by another man's possessions and mysteries. Today, she would tackle the journal properly. She'd been avoiding a thorough reading, partly from respect for Thomas's privacy, partly from fear of what she might learn. But as January's bitter cold confined her indoors, curiosity finally overcame hesitation. Sarah settled by the fire, the leather-bound journal in her lap. She'd made tea from pine needles as Thomas's survival guide had instructed, the sharp, citrusy aroma filling the cabin. Outside, wind drove snow against the windows in rhythmic gusts. The journal's early entries were straightforward: weather conditions, wildlife sightings, equipment maintenance, professional, detached, scientific. But as Sarah read chronologically, the tone shifted, entries becoming more personal, more troubled. March 18, first significant anomaly detected today. Equipment verified functional, readings triple-checked. Distortion field approximately 3 meters in diameter, duration 47 seconds. No visible manifestation, but compass needle rotated contrary to all known laws of physics. Reported findings to Elena. She'll arrive next week to verify. March 25. Elena confirmed readings. We've discovered something extraordinary: localized disruptions in space-time continuum. Measurable, documented, repeatable. The implications are staggering. Carter wants immediate notification of Oversight Committee. Elena agrees. I've asked for more time, more data before we go public. This could change everything we understand about physics, about reality itself. Sarah paused, frowning. Space-time disruptions. Was Thomas delusional, or had he actually discovered something revolutionary? She read on. April 2. Elena saw it today. Actually saw it. We were taking readings at Site 7 when the air rippled. Only way to describe it. Like heat waves above summer asphalt, but more geometric, more defined. Equipment went haywire. For exactly 94 seconds, we could see through to somewhere else. Not clearly, like looking through frosted glass, but definitely not our forest, not our time. Elena took photos, but I doubt they'll show anything. Some things the human eye perceives that cameras cannot. Tucked between these pages, Sarah found folded papers, printouts of data, coordinates, timestamps, technical information beyond her comprehension. But the meticulous documentation suggested Thomas was recording actual observations, not hallucinations. More disturbing entries followed. May 12, Carter brought military observers today. They asked the wrong questions. Not what are these anomalies, but can they be controlled, predicted, utilized? I don't like the direction this is heading. June 7, project officially classified now. New security protocols, limited access to data, armed guards at perimeter stations. Elena says it's standard procedure for sensitive discoveries. I'm not convinced. June 28, argument with Carter. They want to amplify the anomalies, create stable corridors. I've warned repeatedly about unpredictable consequences. Elena caught in the middle, trying to mediate. Funding will continue, but I'm being sidelined, consulting capacity only from now on. Sarah found a separate notebook hidden among the journal's later pages, smaller, with a black cover. Inside, in handwriting more hurried than Thomas's usual careful script, were what appeared to be hidden research notes, displacement theory. Objects or persons passing through anomalies may experience temporal shifts. Evidence: 1. Carbon dating discrepancies in organic material found at sites. 2. Mechanical watch found at Site 12 running backwards. 3. My own experience of missing time during large event at Site 9, warning signs of imminent anomaly. 1. Electrical disturbances. 2. Compass deviations. 3. Aurora-like phenomena visible only at specific light frequencies. 4. Animal avoidance behavior. Wildlife instinctively avoid affected areas. The final pages contained increasingly paranoid observations. September 8. Someone is watching the cabin. Found footprints. Evidence of surveillance equipment in trees to the north. Military. Carter's team not taking chances. Moving essential research to cellar. October 3. Anomalies increasing in frequency and duration. Monitoring indicates they're spreading toward populated areas. Sent warning to Oversight Committee. No response. October 10. Elena called. 3 researchers disappeared during test at main facility. Equipment found. Personnel vanished. Official story: equipment malfunction. Fatal accident. Elena says otherwise. They crossed over. Intentionally or accidentally they're gone. And the military wants to replicate the conditions. October 14. Lights on the ridge again, moving in formation. They know I'm here. If anyone finds this. The entry ended abruptly, mid-sentence. The remaining pages were blank. Sarah closed the journal, her mind reeling. If even half of what Thomas had documented was true, the implications were terrifying. Tears at the fabric of reality. Mysterious disappearances. Military interest in weaponizing the phenomena. And according to the dates, these events had been escalating right up until Thomas's sudden departure in mid-October. Just weeks before she'd found the cabin, she glanced toward the window, where darkness had fallen. Was she truly alone on this mountain? Were the strange lights she'd glimpsed during the storm connected to these anomalies? Most concerning, if Thomas's research was riotous, was the cabin itself safe? Or was she living at the epicenter of something dangerous and beyond her understanding? The baby kicked sharply, as if sensing her distress. Sarah placed a protective hand over her belly. "Don't worry," she whispered. "We'll be careful." But for the first time since finding the cabin, Sarah found herself listening for sounds beyond the wind, watching for movements in the darkness that might not be entirely natural. Sleep eluded Sarah that night, her mind churning with Thomas's journal revelation. Every creak of the cabin's timbers, every whistle of wind became suspect. Was it merely winter's touch on aging wood, or something more sinister? The anomalies Thomas had documented, the military interest, the researchers who had vanished, all of it felt too fantastical to believe, yet too detailed to dismiss. Dawn brought no relief. Sarah woke from fitful slumber to find the cabin unusually cold. The fire had died completely, strange as she'd banked it carefully before finally drifting off. Rising awkwardly, she rebuilt it, movements mechanical while her thoughts raced. Mid-morning, a sound froze her in place, a distinct crack from outside, too sharp to be settling snow or wind-blown branches. Sarah moved to the window cautiously, peering through a gap in the curtains. Fresh tracks marked the pristine snow around the cabin. Not human footprints, that much was immediately clear. but not any animal track she recognized either. The impressions formed a meandering path from the eastern tree line to the cabin's north wall, circled the structure once, then disappeared back into the forest. Pounding, Sarah retrieved the rifle from its hooks. The weight felt alien in her hands. She checked that it was loaded as Thomas's guide had illustrated, then positioned herself where she could watch both the door and the largest window. Minutes stretched into an hour. Nothing further disturbed the snowy landscape. Slowly, Sarah's breathing returned to normal. Perhaps just a deer or elk with an unusual gait, she reasoned. Mountain lions were known in these parts too. The tracks probably appeared strange because of how the snow had shifted or melted. Rationality restored some calm, but Sarah couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Setting the rifle aside but within reach, she busied herself with necessary tasks, stoking the fire, preparing a simple meal, checking her dwindling supply of clean clothing. The sound came again near dusk. That same sharp crack like a branch breaking under sudden weight. This time Sarah didn't approach the window. Instead, she extinguished the oil lamp, leaving only the fire's glow to illuminate the cabin. In the dimness, she could see out without being easily spotted from outside. Movement caught her eye, a shadow detaching from the tree line, gliding over the snow with unnatural smoothness. The figure paused at the edge of the clearing. Though too distant to discern details, something about its proportions seemed wrong. Too tall, too thin to be human, yet moving with apparent intelligence and purpose. Sarah's mouth went dry. She reached for the rifle again, wincing as the floorboards creaked beneath her shifting weight. The figure's head snapped toward the cabin, at least what Sarah assumed was its head. For a terrible moment it stood motionless, as if staring directly at her through walls and darkness. Then it moved toward the cabin. Sarah raised the rifle, her hands trembling. She had never fired a gun, had always abhorred them. Now, with her baby's life potentially at stake, her finger found the trigger with surprising resolve. 3 rapid knocks rattled the door, not random pounding, deliberate, almost polite. Human knocks. Hello? A voice called, unmistakably human, male, weary. Is anyone there? Please, I need help. Sarah remained frozen, the rifle trained on the door. This could be a trap. Thomas's journal had mentioned military interest, surveillance. Please, the voice came again, cracking with desperation. I'm injured. I won't hurt you. Conflict tore at Sarah. Basic humanity urged her to help. Survival instinct screamed danger. I'm armed, she called finally, her voice steadier than she felt. Step back from the door, into the moonlight where I can see you. A pause, then the sound of shuffling steps. Sarah moved to the window, angling for a better view while staying partially hidden. A man stood in the clearing now, ordinary height, bundled in a heavy parka, one arm cradled awkwardly against his chest. Blood stained the snow at his feet. Not the strange figure she'd glimpsed earlier. Had she imagined it? What do you want? Sarah demanded through the glass. Sanctuary, the man replied simply. Warmth. I've been tracking through the mountains for days. Fell on the eastern ridge. Think my arm's broken. Saw the smoke from your chimney. His breath clouded the frigid air. Please, I'm no threat to you. Sarah weighed her options. Turning away someone genuinely in need went against everything she believed. Yet Thomas's warnings echoed in her mind. Trust no one. Are you alone? She asked. The man nodded, grimacing with pain at the movement. Completely. A decision crystallized. She would allow him shelter, but maintain caution. Sarah positioned the rifle prominently as she unbolted the door, keeping distance between them. Come in, she said, but know that I'll use this if I have to. The stranger's eyes widened slightly at the sight of her pregnant belly, but he made no comment as he limped across the threshold. In the firelight, Sarah could see his face clearly, weather-beaten, bearded, exhausted. Early 40s, perhaps. Intelligent eyes clouded now with pain. Thank you, he said simply, remaining near the door as if understanding her weariness. "My name is Michael. Michael Anders." Sarah nodded, but offered no introduction in return. Instead, she gestured toward a chair while keeping the rifle ready. "Sit there, I'll look at your arm." Outside, snow began to fall again, covering the strange tracks that had circled the cabin, including those that had approached from a completely different direction than the injured stranger. Michael Anders had a broken radius and significant frostbite on 2 fingers. Sarah splinted his arm using techniques from Thomas's first aid manual and treated the frostbite as best she could with supplies from the cabin's medical kit. Throughout her ministrations, she kept the rifle within reach, her wariness evident. "You have medical training?" Michael asked, wincing as she secured the splint. "I was a veterinary assistant for 3 years, Sarah replied, offering the minimum information. "Animals, people, bones work the same way." Michael nodded, his eyes moving around the cabin, taking in details. "You've been here a while," he observed, not a question. "Long enough," Sarah finished bandaging his hand. "How did you really get here?" "The passes have been closed for weeks." A barely perceptible hesitation. "I was part of a research team, weather monitoring station on the North Ridge. Got separated during a data collection run when the last storm hit. Been trying to find my way back." The explanation sounded rehearsed. Sarah said nothing, merely raised an eyebrow. Michael sighed. "Look, I understand your caution. Woman alone, middle of nowhere, stranger shows up. I'd be suspicious too. But I promise I'm not a threat. Just a scientist with bad luck and worse navigation skills." "What kind of scientist?" Sarah asked. Thomas's journal entries fresh in her mind. "Meteorology, climate patterns specifically." He gestured toward his pack, which Sarah had placed out of his reach. "My credentials are in there if you want to check." Sarah shook her head. "Rest. We'll talk more tomorrow." That night she slept in fitful bursts, the rifle beside her. Michael remained on the sofa, occasionally shifting uncomfortably but making no suspicious movements. Outside, wind began to rise, the prelude to another mountain storm. Morning brought blizzard conditions. Sarah woke to howling gales and the creaking protest of the cabin's timbers under assault. Snow drove horizontally past windows, rapidly disappearing behind drifts. The temperature inside had dropped, despite the fire's constant burn. "Bad one coming," Michael observed, watching her check the windows. He had barely touched the breakfast she'd provided, oatmeal with dried berries from Thomas's stores. "You should eat," Sarah said. "We might need to conserve fuel, which means less cooking." Michael nodded, obediently taking a spoonful. "I don't suppose the radio works." He gestured toward the weather radio on the shelf. "Barely, picks up static mostly." Sarah noticed water dripping from the ceiling corner. A new development. "That's not good." The drip accelerated as the morning progressed. By noon, water stained the wall beneath it, and the ceiling boards visibly sagged. The storm's ferocity continued to escalate, wind screaming around the cabin's corners with almost sentient rage. "Roof's compromised," Michael said, standing beneath the worsening leak. "Snow weight combined with wind stress. It'll collapse if we don't address it." Sarah knew he was right, but hesitated to let him help. Pregnancy limited her mobility, made ladder climbing dangerous, yet necessity outweighed suspicion. "There's a tarp in the utility closet, and tools." Working together, they positioned Thomas's stepladder beneath the weakened section. Michael climbed up while Sarah braced the ladder, rifle temporarily set aside. Water dripped steadily now, soaking his already splinted arm as he examined the damage. "Roof beam has shifted. Need to brace it, then patch from outside when the storm passes." He glanced down. "Hand me the hammer and those nails, and that piece of 2x4. Reluctantly impressed by his competence, Sarah complied. Michael worked one-handed, grimacing with pain, but methodically securing a temporary brace against the compromised beam. The leak slowed, but didn't stop entirely. "That'll hold until we can properly repair it," he said, descending the ladder. "But there's more bad news." Before he could elaborate, A tremendous crack split the air. The entire cabin shuddered, and a portion of the roof, the northwest corner furthest from the fire, collapsed inward. Snow and frigid air poured through the gaping hole as wind shrieked in triumph at breaching their shelter. "Move! Get away from that hole!" Michael shouted, pulling Sarah toward the kitchen area as more of the structure groaned ominously. They huddled by the stone chimney, the sturdiest part of the cabin, as another section of roof gave way. The temperature plummeted instantly. Snow swirled through the room, dousing lamps, threatening the fire. "We need to maintain the fire at all costs," Michael shouted over the storm's roar. "Otherwise we'll freeze before morning." Sarah nodded, already moving to protect the flames with a cooking sheet as a shield. Michael dragged the sofa closer to the hearth, creating a barrier against the invading snow and wind. "The cellar," Sarah said suddenly, remembering. "There's a cellar. It will be warmer than up here, protected from the wind at least." Together they gathered essential supplies: food, water, blankets, first aid kit. Sarah retrieved the rifle and Thomas's journal from beside the bed. The baby kicked vigorously, responding to her elevated heart rate and the cabin's dropping temperature. As they prepared to descend through the trapdoor, Sarah noticed an old ham radio among Thomas's equipment in the corner, now partially buried under fallen roof debris. On impulse, she grabbed it. The cellar had contained radio equipment. Perhaps together the components could be made functional. "Let's go," she said, pulling back the rug to reveal the trapdoor. The cellar might have its own mysteries and dangers, but at that moment it offered their only refuge from nature's onslaught. Behind them, more of the cabin's roof surrendered to the storm's fury. The cellar saved their lives that night, while the storm raged above, destroying much of the cabin's roof and upper walls. Sarah and Michael huddled in the relative safety below ground. The temperature remained just above freezing, uncomfortable, but survivable. They took turns tending a small camp stove Thomas had stored among his emergency supplies, its tiny flame providing minimal heat and light. Morning brought eerie silence. The storm had passed, leaving destruction in its wake. "We need to assess the damage," Sarah said, her breath clouding in the cold air. "See what's salvageable," Michael nodded, flexing his splintered arm. "The structural supports might still be sound. We could rebuild enough for temporary shelter." Sarah studied him in the dim light. Despite her lingering suspicion, Michael had proven capable during the crisis. His injury hadn't prevented him from helping, and his knowledge of construction had potentially saved them both. "Let's look," she agreed. They climbed the narrow stairs and pushed open the trapdoor. Light streamed through gaping holes in the roof, illuminating devastation. Snow covered everything. The bed, the sofa, the table, the northwest corner had collapsed completely, with support beams splintered like matchsticks. Sarah felt a moment of despair before practicality reasserted itself. Kitchen area seems intact, and the chimneys standing. "South wall too," Michael observed. "We could create a smaller shelter, using what remains, concentrate our efforts on one defensible space." They ate methodically, salvaging usable materials, clearing snow, and assessing structural integrity. By midday, they had established that roughly 1/3 of the cabin could be made habitable. The kitchen area and a small portion of the main room centered around the fireplace. "We'll need more wood," Michael said, gazing at the depleted woodpile, partly buried under collapsed roofing. "I know where to find some," Sarah replied, thinking of the fallen trees she'd spotted on previous walks. "But first we should check something." She led the way out. The storm had transformed the landscape again, deepening snow in valleys while scouring it from ridges. Drifts rose higher than Sarah's head in places, creating an alien topography. The temperature had risen slightly, making the snow heavy and wet. Good for rebuilding, difficult for traversing. "What are we looking for?" Michael asked as they struggled through thigh-deep snow toward the eastern ridge. "During my walks, I noticed an unusual structure about a half-mile east. Never investigated properly." Sarah paused to catch her breath, one hand supporting her belly. "Might be another shelter option." Michael looked skeptical, but followed without comment. They crested the ridge an hour later, both exhausted from fighting through the snow. Sarah pointed toward a dark shape half buried in white, a small rectangular structure, with metal siding, partially concealed beneath evergreen boughs. "What is that?" Michael asked, his casual tone belied by sudden tension in his posture. "I was hoping you might know," Sarah countered, watching his reaction closely. "Given your research team in the area." Michael hesitated, then sighed. "It's a monitoring station, part of the weather study network." Sarah said nothing, waiting. "All right," Michael conceded. "Not just weather. I wasn't completely honest before." "I know," Sarah said simply. The structure had a reinforced door secured with a keypad lock. Michael touched it cautiously. "Power's out," he observed. "Storm must have damaged the solar array." He glanced at Sarah. "You don't seem surprised about this place." The previous cabin occupant kept detailed journals, mentioned research stations. She deliberately avoided specifics, testing Michael's reaction. His expression shifted subtly: recognition, weariness. Thomas Kerr. Now it was Sarah's turn to be surprised. "You knew him, not personally, by reputation." "He was controversial in certain scientific circles." They circled the structure. One window had cracked during the storm, allowing them to peer inside. Scientific equipment lined the walls, sensors, monitors, data collection devices, all dormant without power. A desk held research materials and what appeared to be logging journals, similar to Thomas's. "Could we use any of this?" Sarah asked, practical concerns temporarily overriding curiosity. Michael assessed the equipment. "Some of it, batteries, maybe parts to repair your ham radio, possibly emergency rations." "Can you open it?" He studied the keypad thoughtfully. "Maybe. These stations typically use standardized access codes for field personnel. I know a few we could try." As Michael worked on the door, Sarah explored the perimeter, her foot striking something hard beneath the snow. She knelt awkwardly, brushing away the white powder to reveal a strange stone about the size of her palm. Unlike the typical mountain granite, this rock had an unusual bluish hue with geometric patterns etched into its surface. Patterns eerily similar to those in Thomas's journal and on the quilt. Sarah slipped it into her pocket just as Michael called out triumphantly. The door had opened. The interior smelled of electronics and artificial heating. Emergency lighting cast a dim red glow. Shelves held precisely what Michael had predicted. Batteries, spare parts, ration, but also more puzzling items. Specialized equipment, labeled temporal field monitoring. Charts showing data similar to what Sarah had seen in Thomas's notes, and a locked cabinet marked with the now familiar triangle and wavy line symbol. Michael moved through the space with the familiarity of someone who had been in similar facilities before, gathering useful supplies while avoiding Sarah's questioning gaze. "We should hurry," he said. "Storm damaged the roof seals. This place will deteriorate quickly." As they prepared to leave, loaded with salvaged supplies, Sarah felt the first contraction, mild but unmistakable. She gasped, hand going to her belly. "What's wrong?" Michael asked, alarmed. "Nothing," she lied, regaining composure. "Just tired. Let's get back to the cabin before dark." The false contraction passed, but left Sarah acutely aware of her vulnerability. Her baby would arrive within weeks. She needed shelter, warmth, safety, and answers about what exactly had brought Michael Anders to her door during a snowstorm, and whether it was truly coincidence that had led him to Thomas Kerr's cabin. They spent 3 days rebuilding a portion of the cabin, using salvaged materials and techniques from Thomas's survival guides. Sarah and Michael created a smaller but weatherproof shelter within the damaged structure. The chimney remained intact, providing essential heat. They partitioned off the kitchen and a small living area with tarps and repositioned lumber, creating a space that retained warmth reasonably well. During their labors, Sarah observed Michael carefully. Despite his injury, he worked methodically, displaying skills that seemed inconsistent with his claimed meteorology background. He knew construction techniques, understood structural engineering principles, and handled tools with practiced ease. When questioned, he offered vague explanations about field experience and necessary skills for remote deployments. Sarah kept her doubts to herself, maintaining vigilant awareness without open confrontation. The baby's impending arrival necessitated pragmatism. She needed Michael's help, regardless of his true identity or motives. On the fourth morning after the storm, while Michael reinforced the makeshift roof, Sarah discovered something unexpected. The storm damage had exposed a previously hidden section of wall near the fireplace. Pulling away splintered boards revealed a narrow compartment, a deliberate hiding place built between the logs. Inside was a metal document box. Sarah glanced toward the roof, confirming Michael remained occupied outside, before retrieving the box and on it quickly. Inside she found a weatherproof pouch containing papers, photographs, and a small digital storage device. The documents told a story far more complex than Thomas's journals had suggested. Government research authorization forms described Project Kronos, an experimental study of temporal anomalies discovered in the northern Cascade region. Technical reports detailed how these anomalies created measurable distortions in space-time, allowing glimpses of what appeared to be alternate timelines or futures. Most alarming were internal memos documenting the project's ethical concerns. Thomas had led initial research, discovering naturally occurring anomalies. When military oversight recognized potential applications, the project's focus shifted from observation to exploitation. Thomas's protests were documented in formal complaints, each stamped, "Are reviewed, no action required." The final document was a whistleblower report Thomas had prepared for scientific oversight committees and media outlets. It detailed how Project Kronos had moved beyond passive research to active manipulation of temporal fields, creating artificial anomalies despite catastrophic risk assessments. He described experiments sending objects and eventually living organisms through these manufactured tiers in reality, with disturbing results. Objects returning from passage through induced anomalies demonstrate molecular instability. Organic material exhibits accelerated decay or unprecedented growth patterns. Test animals display neurological and behavioral changes inconsistent with their species. Most concerning, temporal displacement appears cumulative within affected geographical areas, creating expanding zones where conventional physical laws become increasingly unstable. Thomas's report concluded with a warning. Current military applications focus on surveillance of alternative timelines and potential weaponization of cross-temporal transport. Ethics have been systematically abandoned in pursuit of strategic advantage. If these experiments continue at current intensity, my calculations predict irreversible damage to local space-time fabric within 68 months. The mountain range containment we've relied upon will fail as effects propagate outward. I cannot overstate the existential threat this represents. The report was dated 2 weeks before Thomas's disappearance. Photographs showed research facilities, equipment setups, and team members, including a younger Michael Anders, labeled as Dr. Michael Anders, quantum physics specialist, security clearance level 4. Sarah's hands trembled as she replaced everything except one photograph, which she slipped into her pocket. Returning the box to its hiding place, she rearranged the damaged boards to conceal it once more. That evening, as they ate a simple meal of reconstituted stew from the monitoring station's emergency rations, Sarah carefully steered the conversation toward the research. "The previous occupant," she began casually, "Thomas Kerr, you mentioned knowing of him professionally." Michael nodded, his expression guarded. "By reputation only, brilliant physicist, especially regarding quantum field theory. Had some unconventional ideas about space-time manipulation. Were his ideas really so unconventional, or just inconvenient for certain applications?" Michael's spoon paused halfway to his mouth. His eyes met hers, calculation evident behind them. "What exactly did you find in Thomas's things?" he asked quietly. Sarah maintains steady eye contact. Enough to know you're not a meteorologist. Enough to wonder why a quantum physicist with level 4 security clearance would be wandering these mountains alone during winter. The silence stretched between them. Outside, wind moaned through damaged trees, a sound uncomfortably similar to distant voices. "I didn't lie about getting separated from my team," Michael finally said. "But you're right about the rest." He set down his bowl. "The question is, how much do you actually know about what was happening here? About what Thomas discovered, about why his cabin might be both the safest and most dangerous place in these mountains?" Sarah placed her hand protectively over her belly, feeling the baby shift beneath her palm. "I know enough to be afraid," she admitted, "and enough to suspect you're not here by accident." Michael's expression softened slightly. "No," he agreed. "Not by accident, but perhaps not for the reasons you fear." He glanced toward the window, where darkness had fallen completely. "I came looking for Thomas, to warn him." His gaze returned to Sarah, grave and direct. "And now I need to warn you. What he predicted, it's happening. Faster than anyone anticipated. And we're sitting right at the epicenter." That night, after Michael revealed his true identity, Sarah couldn't sleep. His explanation had been detailed, scientific, and terrifying. Project Kronos had initially discovered natural temporal anomalies in these mountains, areas where the fabric of space-time had worn thin, creating brief windows into other possibilities, other timelines. What had begun as pure research devolved into military experimentation, artificial amplification of these anomalies for potential weapons applications. Thomas had objected, documented the dangers, eventually fled with critical research. Michael claimed he'd broken from the project too, coming to warn Thomas that the anomalies were accelerating beyond predicted models. The cabin's location, once selected for its proximity to natural anomalies for observation purposes, now sat in an expanding displacement field where reality itself grew increasingly unstable. Sarah paced the small area they'd rehabilitated, one hand on her lower back, the other cradling her belly. The baby had been unusually active since the storm, as if responding to her elevated stress. Or perhaps the thought chilled her, responding to something else entirely. Near dawn, a mechanical clicking from outside interrupted her troubled thoughts. Sarah moved to the window, peering through frost-edged glass. In the pale, pre-morning light, she spotted a device attached to a nearby pine tree, a small box with a glass lens aimed directly at the cabin, a motion-triggered camera. Her first thought was that Michael had placed it there, despite his apparent candor. But its weathered casing and accumulation of ice suggested longer placement. Thomas's surveillance system, perhaps, or something left by the military project Michael had described. After Michael woke, Sarah showed him the discovery. He examined it through the window, frowning. "Not ours," he said finally. "Not Thomas's either, based on the design. Third party, meaning someone else is watching this location. Has been for some time." His expression darkened. "We should retrieve it. See if it stores images locally." Together they trudged through knee-deep snow to the tree. Michael, despite his injured arm, climbed carefully to reach the device. It was secured with a specialized bracket that he struggled to detach one-handed. "Here," Sarah called, extending Thomas's multi-tool toward him. "Try this." Using the tool, Michael freed the camera and dropped it carefully into Sarah's outstretched hands. It was heavier than it looked, military-grade construction with no manufacturer markings. They brought it inside for examination. Michael's technical knowledge proved valuable as he disassembled the weatherproof casing to reveal sophisticated electronics. A memory card sat nestled among components. "Bingo," he murmured, extracting it carefully. "Now we need a way to read this." Sarah remembered the laptop she'd seen in the monitoring station. Would the equipment we salvaged work? It did. Using a portable computer from the station, they accessed the memory card's contents. Hundreds of images appeared, time-stamped and categorized. Many showed mundane activity, wildlife, weather patterns, occasional glimpses of Thomas going about his routines. More disturbing were night images from the past few months, after Thomas's disappearance but before Sarah's arrival. These showed strange light phenomena in the clearing, glowing, geometric patterns hovering above the ground. Several captured what appeared to be distortions in the air itself, like heat waves, but more structured, more deliberate. And a few, taken just days before Sarah found the cabin, showed something else entirely, a figure at the forest's edge, too tall, too thin to be human, its proportions subtly wrong in ways that defied precise description. In each sequential image it stood motionless, observing the cabin from a different position, slightly closer each time. The final images in the sequence, dated the night of Sarah's arrival, showed her trudging through snow toward the cabin, unaware she was being photographed, and behind her, partially obscured by trees but unmistakably present, the same elongated figure, watching. "What is that?" Sarah whispered, her throat tight with fear. Michael studied the images intently. "We called them observers. They appear near active anomalies. We never determined if they're conscious entities or merely symptoms of temporal displacement, manifestations of physics we don't understand." "Are they dangerous?" He hesitated. "Not directly aggressive in documented encounters, but their presence correlates with increased anomaly activity. Where they appear, reality becomes more flexible." More recent images showed Sarah alone at the cabin, then Sarah and Michael working on repairs after the storm, and in the background of several, partially hidden but present, the observer, watching, always watching. The camera kept functioning through the storm. Michael noted, "That suggests it has independent power, and that someone collects this data regularly." "Who?" Sarah demanded. "Not my team," he said grimly. "We abandoned this region after Thomas disappeared. This suggests someone else has taken interest." Sarah stared at the images, particularly those showing the observer. Its presence raised disturbing questions. Had it followed her to the cabin? Had it somehow guided her here? Was it responsible for the strange tracks she'd found circling the cabin that first night? "We need to leave," she decided suddenly. "Find somewhere safer before the baby comes." Michael's expression was sympathetic, but realistic. "Where would we go? The passes are still blocked with snow, and if the displacement field is expanding as rapidly as I suspect, moving could put us in greater danger." This cabin was specially constructed by Thomas. Certain materials, specific geometric reinforcements. "It's not just a shelter, it's a stabilized zone." "You mean we're safer here, despite being at the epicenter?" "Paradoxically, yes. At least until we can better understand the current situation." Michael tapped the computer screen where the observer appeared. "But we should remain vigilant. Set up our own monitoring system." Sarah placed her hand over her belly, feeling the baby shift beneath her touch. "What about my child? What does being born in a displacement field mean?" Michael had no answer for that, his silence more terrifying than any speculation could have been. January slipped into February. The repaired portion of the cabin held against winter's continued assault, though they remained vigilant for signs of structural weakness. Outside, snow accumulated in ever deeper drifts, effectively sealing them in their mountain refuge. Inside, Sarah's body prepared for the inevitable. She woke one night to sharp pain radiating across her lower back. The sensation faded, but left her wide awake, attuned to every twinge and pressure. Not yet, she thought. Too soon, but her body had other ideas. An hour later, another pain gripped her, stronger than before. Sarah breathed through it, mentally calculating dates. She was approximately 36 weeks along, not dangerously premature, but earlier than ideal, especially given their isolation and limited medical supplies. Dawn found her sitting by the fire, timing contractions that remained irregular but persistent. Michael entered from the makeshift sleeping area they'd constructed near the kitchen, immediately noticing her discomfort. "It's starting?" he asked quietly. Sarah nodded, attempting to project more calm than she felt. Early stages. Could be hours yet. Maybe even a false alarm. Michael's expression shifted to focused determination. I'll prepare. Thomas kept medical supplies in the cellar. He disappeared down the trapdoor, returning with a surprisingly comprehensive emergency medical kit. The box contained items specifically for childbirth: sterilized instruments, clean cloths, absorbent pads, surgical gloves. Sarah raised her eyebrows questioningly. Thomas thought of everything. Michael explained, arranging supplies methodically. He believed in preparing for any contingency, or he knew something we don't. Sarah suggested, wincing as another contraction began. Through the morning, her labor progressed slowly. Contractions remained manageable, coming every 15 to 20 minutes. Sarah alternated between walking the small cabin space and resting. Michael maintained a respectful distance while ensuring water boiled constantly, ready when needed. Have you done this before? Sarah asked during a quiet moment, curiosity temporarily overriding privacy concerns. Michael arranged clean cloths beside the bed they'd prepared for delivery. I have medical training, part of field researcher requirements for remote deployments. That's not what I asked. He paused, then nodded once. My sister, remote village in Guatemala during monsoon season. No way to hospital. The baby, healthy girl, 7 pounds, 3 ounces. A fleeting smile crossed his face. Named her after me. Michaela. Something in his tone, a practiced flatness, suggested more to the story. But another contraction interrupted further questions. As afternoon waned, bringing early mountain darkness, Sarah's contractions intensified. The pain became consuming, reducing her world to waves of pressure and moments of recovery. Between, Michael checked her progress with clinical detachment, confirming steady advancement. You're doing well, he encouraged. Textbook labor so far. During a particularly powerful contraction, Sarah's mind flooded with memories. Her mother's death from complications during her brother's birth, the ultrasound technician's concerned face when measuring her narrow pelvic structure, Martin's angry dismissal when she'd announced the pregnancy. Fear surged through her, hot and paralyzing. I can't do this, she gasped when the contraction eased. Not here, not like this. Michael knelt beside her, his expression calm but intent. You can. You're stronger than you realize. I've seen you survive weeks alone in these mountains, rebuild a storm-damaged cabin, face down an armed stranger. His eyes held hers steadily. This child is lucky to have you as their mother. The simple affirmation steadied her. Sarah nodded, gathering resolve, as the next contraction approached. Outside, the day's fading light revealed something unusual, aurora-like lights playing across the snow-covered clearing, despite clear skies. Michael noticed them through the window, his expression tightening. What is it? Sarah asked between controlled breaths. Anomaly indicators, he answered reluctantly. Increasing activity in the displacement field. Another contraction seized her before she could respond, stronger than any before. When it passed, Sarah found the courage to ask, is it dangerous for the baby? Michael hesitated, conflicted between honesty and reassurance. I don't know. The research never addressed childbirth within an active field. He adjusted a cloth beneath her head. But Thomas reinforced this cabin specifically to create a stable zone. We're in the safest possible location. The lights outside intensified as darkness fell completely, casting eerie, shifting patterns through the windows. The colors seemed wrong somehow, hues that didn't belong in nature, moving with almost deliberate intelligence. Sarah's water broke during a powerful contraction that left her gasping. Michael checked her again, confirming she had entered active labor. Not long now, he said, his calm voice belied by concerned glances toward the windows. Try to focus inward. Ignore everything else. Easier said than done. As contractions came faster and stronger, Sarah became aware of another presence, a sensation of being watched that transcended physical perception. Between panes, her gaze drawn repeatedly to the window, where a familiar, elongated silhouette stood motionless in the anomaly lights. The observer had returned, standing silent vigil, as new life prepared to enter a world increasingly untethered from normal reality. "Michael," she gasped, pointing weakly. He followed her gaze, his face hardening at the sight. "Don't look at it. Focus on your breathing." But as the next contraction gripped her, with unprecedented force, Sarah couldn't help wondering, was it mere coincidence that the anomaly activity had intensified precisely as her labor progressed? Or was there connection between the new life within her and the thinning boundaries of reality outside? The question dissolved into pure sensation as her body took control, driving inexorably toward the moment when her child would enter this uncertain world. Pain became Sarah's entire world, waves of it crashing through her body, receding briefly, then returning with greater intensity. Time lost meaning, measured only in contractions and the brief respites between them. Michael remained a steady presence, his voice a distant anchor as she surrendered to the ancient process overtaking her. "You're fully dilated," he announced after checking her progress. "Time to push with the next contraction." Outside, the anomaly lights had intensified to a pulsing glow that illuminated the cabin interior, despite drawn curtains. Strange shadows danced across the walls, elongated, angular forms that seemed to move independently of their source. The observer remained at the window, its silhouette now joined by others, gathering at the clearing's edge like silent witnesses to the impending birth. When the next contraction seized her, Sarah bore down with primal force, a guttural sound escaping her throat. Michael coached her through it, his clinical detachment giving way to genuine encouragement. "Good. I can see the head. Rest now, then again with the next one." 3 more excruciating pushes brought the baby's head fully into the world. Michael worked quickly, checking for the umbilical cord, supporting the tiny emerging form. "One more big push, Sarah. You're almost there." She gathered her remaining strength, channeling it into a final tremendous effort. A sudden release of pressure, a slippery sensation, and then the distinctive, miraculous sound of a newborn's first cry filled the cabin. "It's a girl," Michael announced, his voice thick with emotion that transcended professional distance. "A healthy baby girl." He placed the squalling infant on Sarah's chest, covering them both with clean blankets. The tiny being, slick with birth fluids and impossibly perfect, curled instinctively against her mother's warmth. Sarah gazed down in wonder at the dark hair, the miniature features contorted in outrage at the cold world. "Hello," she whispered. "I'm your mother." The moment of profound connection was interrupted by a tremendous crack from outside, like lightning striking nearby, but continuous, sustained. The cabin trembled. Objects vibrated across surfaces. The anomaly lights flared blindingly bright, then vanished completely, plunging the room into darkness except for their small fire. "What's happening?" Sarah clutched her newborn tighter, protective instincts flaring. Before Michael could answer, the cabin door burst open. Cold air rushed in, carrying snowflakes and the scent of ozone. A figure stumbled through, a man, disheveled and exhausted, clutching what appeared to be a weapon. Michael moved with surprising speed, placing himself between Sarah and the intruder. "Stop right there." The man raised his hands, the gesture revealing a familiar, metal object clutched in his right palm. "Michael, my God, you're alive." Recognition dawned on Michael's face. Thomas, the newcomer, Thomas Kerr himself, older and more weathered than his photographs, staggered further into the cabin, collapsing onto a chair. Blood stained his left sleeve, and his face bore a half-healed gash across one cheek. "They're coming," he gasped, his eyes wild with urgency. The anomaly reached critical mass when his gaze fell on Sarah and the infant. Understanding dawned. The birth, Of course. That's what triggered the cascade. Sarah held her daughter closer. What are you talking about? Who's coming? Thomas exchanged a meaningful glance with Michael, Project Tronus field team, military component. They've been tracking the expanding displacement field for months. He lifted the object in his hand, a government ID badge with his photo. Took this off a scout who found me 3 miles north. More will follow. Michael swore under his breath. We need to move. Now. Not her, Thomas countered, nodding toward Sarah. Not right after childbirth. We can't leave her. We won't, Thomas said firmly. But we need to prepare. He approached Sarah cautiously, respect and wonder softening his haggard features. I'm Thomas Kerr. This was my home. I'm sorry for all of this. Your child's birth has somehow catalyzed the temporal field, accelerating changes I've been monitoring for years. Sarah's exhausted mind struggled to comprehend. Why? What's special about her birth? Thomas shook his head. Unknown, perhaps nothing specific, just new life, entering an already unstable environment. Or perhaps something more. He studied the infant with scientific curiosity tempered by genuine awe. She's beautiful. Have you named her? Not yet. May I? Thomas extended his hands toward the baby, his expression gentle despite his obvious urgency. Instinct warred with reason in Sarah's mind. This was the cabin's rightful owner, the scientist whose research had predicted the dangers now materializing. After a moment's hesitation, she allowed him to hold her newborn daughter. Thomas cradled the infant with surprising tenderness. Perfect, he murmured. Born at the nexus point, where realities converge. He returned the baby carefully to Sarah's arms. We have perhaps an hour before they reach us. Michael, help me prepare defenses. As the men gathered equipment from the cellar, Sarah's exhausted mind filled with questions. How had Thomas survived months in the winter wilderness? What exactly had her daughter's birth triggered? Most urgently, how could they possibly escape military pursuers with a newborn and a mother fresh from childbirth? Outside, snow continued to fall, covering the tracks of whoever had come before, and whoever might be coming next. Dawn broke over the mountain with unusual clarity, the air crystalline after the night's events. Sarah sat beside the fire, her newborn daughter sleeping peacefully against her chest. The tiny being, not yet 12 hours old, breathed in perfect rhythm with her mother, oblivious to the extraordinary circumstances of her birth or the danger surrounding them. Across the cabin, Thomas and Michael worked with focused urgency, voices low but intent. They had spent the night preparing, gathering supplies, reinforcing the cabin's defenses, and most importantly, formulating an escape plan. From their whispered conversations, Sarah had gleaned fragments of their strategy, something about navigating the displacement field and using the anomaly to our advantage. Thomas approached, crouching beside her chair. Despite his haggard appearance, his eyes were kind, his movements gentle. "How are you feeling?" he asked, genuine concern in his voice. "Exhausted, sore, terrified." Sarah managed a weak smile. "But alive, both of us." Thomas nodded, his gaze shifting to the infant. "She's remarkable. Born at the nexus point between realities." He hesitated. "May I ask what you'll call her?" Sarah looked down at her daughter's sleeping face. "Elena," she said softly. It seemed right somehow. A complex emotion crossed Thomas's features. Recognition, pain, acceptance. "A beautiful name," he said finally. "Fitting." Michael joined them, carrying a device Sarah hadn't seen before. A small metallic box with an antenna and digital display. "Satellite phone," he explained. "Thomas had it hidden in a cache 2 miles from here. Our best chance at outside help." "Is it working?" Sarah asked. "Yes, but that's both good and bad news," Thomas interjected. "It's functional, which means we can call for extraction. But it also means the displacement field has temporarily stabilized, which Project Kronos will detect. They'll accelerate their approach. How long do we have?" "Hours, not days," Michael answered grimly. "We need to move before the field destabilizes again or they locate us." Thomas knelt beside Sarah, his expression serious. "We have a plan, but you need to understand the risks. The mountain passes remain snowbound, impassable by conventional means. Our only viable escape route is through an area of active temporal displacement." "You mean one of the anomalies?" Sarah clutched Elena tighter. "You want us to walk through a tear in reality, with a newborn?" "It's actually safer than it sounds," Michael said, though his tone lacked complete conviction. "Thomas has mapped the displacement patterns. We can navigate through areas of minimal distortion to reach a Forest Service emergency shelter beyond the military cordon." "And then what?" Thomas held up the satellite phone. "I have contacts, colleagues who remain skeptical of Project Kronos's military applications, scientists with enough political influence to ensure protection." He paused. "But we must move quickly while Elena's birth is still stabilizing the field." "You still haven't explained why her birth affected the anomalies," Sarah said, struggling to rise from the chair. Thomas and Michael exchanged glances loaded with unspoken communication. "We have theories," Thomas said carefully. "Nothing certain, but new life, especially life brought into existence within an active field, seems to create a temporary anchoring effect on surrounding reality." Michael helped Sarah into the coat they'd adapted for her changed body, then assisted as she secured Elena against her chest in a makeshift carrier fashioned from one of Thomas's old shirts. The baby stirred, but didn't wake, tiny fingers flexing against her mother's warmth. "I need to know everything," Sarah insisted. "No more secrets. What are we really facing out there?" Thomas sighed, relenting. "The observers. They're not just passive witnesses. They're manifestations of potential futures, drawn to nexus points where timelines diverge. Their presence at Elena's birth suggests she represents a significant branch point, meaning your daughter may be important, not just to us, but to whatever future emerges from this temporal instability." Thomas shouldered a pack filled with survival gear, "which is precisely why Project Kronos wants her." The gravity of the situation settled over Sarah. She had fled into these mountains to escape debt collectors, to find a safe place to deliver her child. Instead, she had stumbled into a scientific conspiracy that now threatened that very child. "I'll do whatever it takes," she said, determination hardening her voice. "Just tell me how to keep her safe." Michael finished gathering their supplies, adding Thomas's journals and research notes to his pack. "We follow the displacement map, avoid military patrols, reach the emergency shelter by nightfall. From there, Thomas makes the call." Outside, snow had begun falling again, light, crystalline flakes that sparkled in the morning sun. No tracks yet marred its perfect surface, but that would change soon. Thomas opened the cabin door, scanning the tri-line carefully before gesturing them forward. "Stay close. Don't look directly at any anomalies we encounter. And whatever happens, keep moving." As they stepped from the cabin's shelter into the brilliant white landscape, Sarah cast one final glance at the place that had saved her life and changed it forever. The weathered logs, the sagging porch, the chimney still sending wisps of smoke skyward. For a brief time it had been home. Elena stirred against her chest, eyes opening to take in her first glimpse of the outside world. Dark eyes like her mother's, but with an awareness that seemed beyond her hours of life. "We're going on a journey," Sarah whispered to her daughter as they moved into the forest, following Thomas's careful lead. The first of many adventures together ahead. The trees thinned into a clearing where the air seemed to shimmer with subtle distortion, their passage to potential safety through the very phenomenon that threatened them. Behind them on the ridge they had just descended, dark figures appeared, human in shape but moving with military precision. The search had begun.